All right, and welcome to Hat Trick Sports Talk. We're recording this early in the morning, around 10 a.m. Pacific time. I am joined, as always, by Brandon and Shane. Say hi, guys.
10 a.m. isn't early.
Oh, for me it
It's
is.
sort of early.
For me it is. I'm not used to this
I mean,
in
it's
my
early.
quarantine.
It's early compared to what we
Normally do.
what time we usually record.
We record normally midday, around noon, 1 o'clock during
Yeah.
these times. But let's move on from when we actually record to the NBA is back, man. We got a full week of games. Before we actually get to some of the teams that we want to discuss, Shane, I'll start with you on this. What have been your initial impressions on the Orlando bubble and the games that you've seen so far?
Yeah, okay. So for starters, something that we were talking about beforehand is how is it going to feel without a crowd? And honestly, it's not bad. Like, because they have they have the virtual fans on video, which is, I mean, it's a really clever idea. I would have never thought of that. But it makes it feel like it's sort of lively, because the actual, the audio crowd noise, it's actually real from people that are actually getting excited or whatever, instead of baseball where it's just like a button that they push. And but yes, that's been, it's been fun. It feels, it doesn't feel weird or like it's some strange thing. But yeah, I mean, it's surprising most of all to see how teams have changed in the 4 or 5 month break that they had, because some teams, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but some teams that were really good in the first season, I guess you
Yeah.
could say. Like the Lakers, for instance, are now struggling. And, there are other teams like Houston, right, who were, they were still good, but, now they just look incredible. And you kind of wonder, well, like, where is all this coming from? Or, it just makes you wonder, what happened during those months off, and how that affected different teams.
And then before we get to that more in depth, Brandon, let me get your thoughts on the Orlando bubble and the games that you've seen.
Yeah, I think it's a little strange to me because as Shane said, like so many of the teams that are doing well now are teams that were good to kind of mediocre in the regular season. And then you have the teams that were quite good. Some of them have obviously dropped down a couple rungs or have been exposed a little bit for not being quite as good or quite as deep as everybody gave them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And partially, some of this comes from players refusing to be part of the bubble, and just straight up not wanting to be there. For example, like the Clippers, they had a couple players who,
Yeah, Harold hasn't been
from
in
the
there.
beginning,
Yeah.
were like, nah, this ain't for me. Which, I mean, I guess that's their choice, but
Right. And I think the roster changes too, particularly with the first team we're going to talk about, which honestly, this team has now become hard to watch, which, I mean, I watched every Lakers game pretty much this year, or a good portion of their games. I don't think every single one, of course, but a good percentage of their games before the hiatus. And I felt like, okay, they're in a good spot. And then, of course, with them losing Avery Bradley, it's probably made a bigger impact than we thought. And, of course, Dion Waiters and J.R. Smith kind of still trying to mesh with the team. It's honestly been terrible. And I think, with Toronto, we were like, okay, it's one game. And then I kind of felt the same with OKC, even though the OKC game made me a little queasy because I was like, I don't get what's going on here. And then the Houston game, I was like, this is just ugly. It's not working. Brandon, what are your thoughts on how bad the Lakers have been? Obviously without LeBron in that game against Houston, but even against OKC, they had LeBron and they looked terrible.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that they have is their starting line, which is what everybody talks about all the time, is pretty good. But if you really break it down, at the end of the day, the only two players on their team who are scoring are LeBron James and
Anthony Davis.
You're not going to win a game where your only two players that are scoring most of the time are LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and your bench is atrocious. As we talked about last night, when you are playing a team that has a deeper bench, once it becomes bench versus bench, it doesn't matter if you have Anthony Davis or LeBron James on your team, because it'll get to a point in the game where one or both of those players are not on the court, and then what happens?
I also, before I go to Shane, I want to point out some of these plus minuses. Now, obviously, plus minus isn't everything, but it did showcase to me just how bad they played. Kyle Kuzma, -9. Anthony Davis, -9. Danny Green, -9. Dion Waiters, -14. Dwight Howard, -11. And their bench yesterday was just bizarre. Like Talen Horton-Tucker, Dion Waiters, Markieff Morris, J.R. Smith. I mean, it was just bizarre to watch. Shane, what were your thoughts on the Lakers' troubles so far in the bubble and that game last night against Houston?
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, the injuries at first, they didn't concern me because I thought, okay, but they still got, kind of their core. But, seeing that this is clearly affecting them. And not only that, but then to hear yesterday that LeBron said that there's some type of organizational problem that he won't.
Off the court issue.
Yeah, which that doesn't surprise me, because now I just wonder what it is. But because you don't just. Obviously LeBron is out now, but you don't just go from being as good as you are and still having LeBron and AD and losing this badly. It's just weird. I get that they had, that long time off. Maybe they just came in thinking, oh, we got the first seed. Who cares? We'll just treat it as like a scrimmage game, essentially. But it doesn't feel like that's the case. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I guess we just have to see what happens. It's weird though. They definitely don't look like themselves.
It is weird though. I think Reggie Miller pointed this out last night or maybe a few games ago or whatever, where it did feel to me early on at least that Frank Vogel was like, all right, we got the 1 seed. Let's kind of figure out how this team meshes. But I think you're right, Shane. I think this is a bigger issue. I don't think you could lose by 20 to OKC, lose by 20 to Houston, and think that it's not a bigger issue. It's just really bizarre. And then let's go to Houston. Before the hiatus felt like Houston, I don't get it. Like what if they're cold? And I still worry about, what if they're cold from 3, but this 3-ball thing is working out beautifully. That game last night to me was like 3s are bigger than 2s, right? That's obvious. That game was like that. That's why you shoot 3s last night, because Lakers couldn't shoot threes for their life and got killed because Houston is just built to shoot threes. And even with a guy like PJ Tucker, who's 6'7", they're still figuring out ways to just shoot threes all over the yard. And it's not even a big deal that they're getting out rebounded on the boards and that they don't have points in the paint at all. It doesn't matter pretty much at all. Brandon, what are your thoughts on Houston so far?
I mean, shooting threes is great, right? But you're not going to win a championship just shooting threes. It's impressive. They're shooting threes. They're scoring a lot of points. Cool, great. I think they're a team that maybe people are giving. They're the team that everyone's going to be hyped about. And then fast forward to maybe the first or second round of the playoffs, and a team's going to come along that is able to break down and guard against shooting threes and kind of flip the script and go, okay, well, we're going to stop you shooting the threes and we'll see if you can go down low. Now, I don't know. To be honest, I haven't watched a ton of the Rockets, so I don't know.
See,
you know what it reminds me of? Is the Ravens.
In what way?
Well, how everybody was super high on them and thinking, oh, they're this great offensive team, and yeah, they're flashy, and then you get them in the divisional round, and a team that had a better game plan than them shut them out pretty easily.
Yeah.
But I wonder who are the Titans then in this Western Conference? Who is it? Is it the Lakers? Is it the Clippers?
Clippers probably, I'd say.
I would say the Clippers, but to be honest, they would play the Clippers pretty early, maybe. I don't see how I could easily now see them getting to the Western Conference Finals. I think they would absolutely struggle against the Clippers. Zubac was ridiculous last night. He finished 21 and 11 boards, 20 points, 11 boards. If he plays like that, they're going to be solid moving forward. Not saying that he will, but I do feel like when you have a guy like Zubac there who can get boards or someone like that, that's going to be a bigger issue for them. Are teams that can actually crash the glass and have transition offense, and they're not going to be able to handle that. But again, the threes can sort of counteract that. I'm not too sure, but I do feel like if you look at the West, the Clippers are that one team. Brandon, do you feel the same way?
Yeah.
Well, I have a question though. So I'm looking at the standings right now. So Houston is currently in the 4th seed in the West.
Mm-hmm.
So Denver's in the 3rd, but there is a chance Houston could move up.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, they wouldn't play the Clippers until the Western Conference semifinals if they were to play.
Right. So that's kind of the point. Yeah. If they play in the semis, then the Nuggets are a difficult matchup as well. If you look at a guy like Jokic, Michael Porter, who we'll get to later, I think that would be an interesting matchup as well. That's another team that I think they'll struggle with. So I think it's those two in particular for me, now looking more clearly at the standings.
Yeah. What I'm curious about is who's going to get the 8 seed. Because what we've been talking a lot about the Lakers and the weird way that they've played. But it makes me wonder, because they're obviously going to play the 8 seed. And so at this point, it's New Orleans is probably out.
Mm-hmm.
Kings, Spurs. But, it could be Memphis, could be Portland, or honestly, it could be Phoenix.
Right.
Yeah.
That seemed crazy a month ago, but, I don't know.
Phoenix. So I look at – okay, so let's just – well, again, remember, we're going to have a play-in game here, right? We are going to have a play-in game for the 8th seed. We have to remember that. I look at this group here. Memphis, to me, has not looked good. And, of course, losing Jaren Jackson Jr. to me puts them completely out. I think Jaren is too important to what they're trying to do in Memphis. I don't think Ja can do it by himself. I think he needs Jaren to be successful there. It's a young team. They'll grow. Suns, this is basically the first month of the year. If you remember going way back in October, this is how they played. It's just they come out the gates fast and then they slow down. So if they make the playoffs, I think they're going to start slowing down pretty dramatically. Plus, as you mentioned, Brandon, their schedule, the first 4 games hasn't been incredible. But let's highlight in this group, before we go in depth more on the Grizzlies and the Suns, the Trailblazers. Because I think, to me, the Blazers could be a much tougher matchup for the Lakers than we originally thought. Brandon, do you feel that way as well?
I don't know. I think for me, there's a part of me that with the Suns, there's a part of me that is like saying they are like a flash from the pan sort of team, you know, where like they go on a run and then they'll the moment they get their first loss, they'll sizzle out.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, the Trailblazers are pretty good. They've played pretty good lately.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't know. I don't know if I would quite yet say that the Grizzlies won't hold on to that 8th seed. But at least it's looking interesting.
Shane, do you think, like I think, that the Blazers pretty much have this 8 seed locked up, especially if they play in a play-in game with, let's say, Memphis?
I think they will get it. Yeah. I mean, they're the only team that's beaten Houston in the bubble, as far as I know, and they beat Denver as well. I mean, they're between those 3 teams in the 8 seed, they're definitely the one that I could see maybe beating the Lakers. Not saying that they would, but they would. Yeah, they'd be tough for them.
They would certainly make it competitive, and let me highlight some things with the Blazers as well. In particular, obviously Lillard last night, the 3-point barrage that they did last night was just ridiculous to watch. But I mean, Carmelo, if you guys haven't filled out the Carmelo Anthony apology form, please go fill that out, because he's been playing. I mean, he's been playing like he did middle of the season when he came in before the hiatus. He's just playing ridiculously. And keep in mind, this roster is healthy now. Nurkic is playing ridiculous. The roster is healthy. So this hiatus helped them tremendously. CJ McCollum's played great, but very specifically, Gary Trent Jr. has been a revelation for this team. I mean, I think he's scored 15 a game the last few games. He's absolutely balling and being another threat from 3 for them. They're just playing like a bunch of dogs. They just want to get this 8 seed, and they're committed to getting the 8 seed. Lillard wants a shot at the Lakers at number 1, and rightfully so after what we've seen for the Lakers the last few weeks. Or the last week, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because, I mean, usually the 8 seed is kind of almost like a throwaway team in the tournament, because, you think, oh, they're not going to beat the first seed, whatever. But, I mean, if you look at how good Portland's been and how bad LA has been, I don't know, honestly.
I think it could go 6 or 7 or something around there.
I think it would go to 7. Probably. But that's looking ahead.
Yeah. Let's shift to the Eastern Conference and talk about the Miami Heat. Now, obviously, they lost to the Bucks last night after leading by about 15. But I look at this Heat team and I go, the ball movement is great. They didn't have Jimmy Butler. They're shooting threes. Duncan Robinson is a ridiculous three-point shooter. And I look at them, especially with Bam and how Bam's been playing in the bubble so far, as a dark horse in the East to make it to the finals. Shane, your thoughts on the Miami Heat?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily see them getting to the finals, but this team has been a pleasant surprise to say the least. I mean, I wasn't, I was expecting them to, like most people, probably be maybe like a 7 or 8 seed, just kind of a, just a nice team, but nothing special. But yeah, I mean, this roster is showing a lot of promise for the future. And of course, like you said, Jimmy Butler, and Bam have been fantastic. I think that they have, they're 2 good pieces, but I think that their team as a whole is very complete. I think there's not a lot of, they don't have like one place that you can point to and say, oh, that's not good, or that can be better, or whatever. You know what I mean? At least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, they'll definitely make some noise in the tournament. And I mean, hey, they could make it, you never know. Maybe Robert will surprise us all.
I'm not saying they'll make the finals. I just feel like they're a dark horse and
They
a
have a
team to watch
chance.
out for. Brandon, your thoughts on the Miami Heat so far?
Like, I don't know. I feel like there's so many teams that you could say could surprise us, like, oh, like the Heat or the Rockets or X or Y or Z. But like, I feel like basketball is a sport that like generally has very little room for upsets. It seems like usually what's on paper is what happens. Like the teams that have performed the best during the season are usually the ones that are gonna make their way to the farther in the tournament. And maybe the Heat like get one surprise round win, but I don't know. I would say they need 1 or 2 more like dominant players.
That
and
is
then
one
they
thing.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, that is one thing I'll say. Like one big hole they have is that I don't think they have really any super effective 3-point shooter.
Well, hey, Duncan's that player though.
Well, yeah,
Duncan
I guess so.
is certainly that player. But I think what you guys are mentioning is that this is an interesting mix, right? This is a mix where it's not entirely perfect, right? This is why I call them a dark horse, where they have a bunch of young talent that is not fully developed yet. They have guys like Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder, some nice veterans, and then, of course, Bam and Jimmy being those stars. So it's an interesting mix. But the question is, how do they really perform? And obviously against the Bucks, the first half was good. The second half wasn't as great. Obviously, Chris Middleton played tremendous, which is very important for them moving forward, of course. But the reality is, this kind of mesh, it is difficult to get to the finals with this kind of mesh, even with Eric Spoelstra and how good he is as a coach. So I think that's one of the things that you guys are pointing out more particularly. Let's get to the Nuggets as well. Denver, of course, Bull was absolutely phenomenal in these scrimmages. And then Michael Porter Jr. just playing out of his mind. Him actually finally getting a good portion of playing time. Brandon, what are your thoughts on Porter Jr. and his coming out party here in the bubble?
Like, are you talking about his skill wise or his stupid commentary on COVID?
No, not that. Just skill-wise.
Skill-wise, I mean, yeah, he's great. I mean, if you watched him play during the season, he was pretty good, I thought.
He was up and down a bit.
But I don't know. I mean, there's like he's on a team that honestly to me has a lot of players that are kind of like to me I would describe them as aight. Like
Yeah.
they're like fine. Like cool. You're talented, you're NBA, doing well, but like the team as a whole is just like if I was gonna describe them, I'd be like, okay.
Even with Denver being as high as they are up in the standings, Shane, do you kind of feel that same way of like they're kind of average, and we're not truly expecting much from them as we get to the playoffs in a few weeks?
I mean, I wouldn't say they're average. I think they're definitely better than that. But come playoffs, no, I'm not. I'm not expecting them to like make the finals or anything. Because I think it's kind of like the Miami situation in a way, where they have some really good guys, obviously Jokic and
Porter now, right?
Right. But it's then everyone else like Murray, Barton,
Gary Harris,
Grant. Yeah, they're not bad, but they're not. You don't look at them and go, oh yeah, these are amazing guys that are gonna make a difference. You know what I mean? So, I think I think with Denver, it's more of like, I think they need like one more guy that is like a star player, and maybe he's there and just hasn't developed yet, or maybe it's someone they pick up later. I don't know. But I think that they kind of need that to sort of solidify it, since we're in the day and age of the duos in the NBA.
Mm-hmm. And then let's move on to Dallas. Luka's been playing out of his mind, as pretty much expected. Shane, what are your thoughts on how Luka's been playing so far?
I mean, impressive, of course. What do we expect from this guy? Like you said, Dallas, they do concern me a bit though, because they've looked okay in the bubble. Not great, but I'm not so sure if they are really set up to make a big impact in this tournament. After seeing them lose to the Clippers like that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them play the Bucks, which is that's not today, is it?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I'm really looking forward to that.
That is tomorrow night, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I feel like that's going to be a really big test or indicator, I guess, in terms of where the team is at. Not saying that they should win, but if they can at least be competitive in it, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I feel like that will that'll reveal a lot to us.
Mm-hmm. Kristaps to me is an interesting player in particular, just because with his size and frame, obviously, as we keep talking about all year, you want him in the post, but they're really trying to spread him out and make him shoot threes, and he's done a good job of that so far. Brandon, what are your thoughts on Dallas?
Dallas is a very unbalanced team. Like they have, like Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic have combined for, I believe, on average about 60 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
That again is not going to get you like winning a good amount of games, Like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at teams like the Raptors or the Celtics or the Clippers who all generally have multiple players on their team who average 10 to 15 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing those teams those are teams that are consistently putting up high scoring games
Mm-hmm.
where you have the scoring spread out across the team, and it shows. Like, it shows in success, right? So many teams in the NBA, I feel like, aren't willing to do the spread out the score, like build a team as a team, like build it where you have multiple players who are going to be able to score, give like 10 to 15 points a night with like assists and whatever, It feels like a lot of what NBA has changed to is, let's get those two big all-star guys who are going to put the team on their back and carry them, getting 30, 40 points a night.
Mm-hmm.
Like, teams need to realize that doesn't work. Like, it doesn't work to just have two guys who are going to carry your team.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need a bit of both. Like, you need those two guys, but then you need a good supporting cast around them,
Mm-hmm.
to use a movie metaphor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the problem with Dallas, because I'm pretty sure they only have three guys that average above 10 points a game.
Yeah.
Well, I would say average, let's say over 20, because I know Seth is averaging, about 16, as he always does. So, I mean, yeah, I feel that. I mean, I think with Dallas, though, you look at guys like Dwight Powell, his impact there. I mean, they have some pieces off the bench. We're just not quite sure necessarily how they mesh come playoff time at the end of the day. And then, Brandon, I'll let you have the floor because I think you deserve it for this next team. I keep talking about Zion and, why he's one of the big reasons as to why this format, and obviously we can all agree at this, the format's actually worked perfectly. But Zion, that first game, only getting 15 minutes, and obviously he's up to about 25 now. This Pelicans team lost by 20 to the Kings yesterday. So you can go ahead and have the floor about Zion and the Pelicans.
Oh, man. Well, we talked about the Pelicans and how I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that this team was even in the playoffs. And you were like, "Oh no, it's Zion. He's such an all-star. He deserves to be in the playoffs. He should be in the playoffs. It's Zion. Oh, Zion this, Zion that. Zion's kind of trash now. Like,
I wouldn't say trash. I would say the minutes have been bad.
He's not great.
He's not. Like, I'm sorry. Any player who is supposed to be on the caliber of Zion, you give LeBron James 15 minutes on the court, he's gonna do some damage. Like, yes, his minutes are not great, but like, if you are a quote unquote future all-star, you should be doing more with that time than just, like, I don't know. It's the Pelicans are a team that came into the bubble as if they didn't want to get that 8th seed. Like,
you know what it is to me?
It's weird.
To me, Zion seems lazy.
Yeah.
See, let me push back on this for a second, because the reality of the matter is I don't think this is a Zion problem. This is not, because
he's overweight. He
fine.
He did not get fit. He had 4 months. 4 months just to be in.
No, okay,
fit.
fine.
You know what LeBron James did? The dude stayed in shape and got even more in shape.
See, I don't have too much of a problem with his size just yet. I think the main problem here is how the Pelicans are actually managing him. like Ryan Russillo was talking about this with Bill Simmons on his podcast last week, where he said it almost seems like the Pelicans don't want the 8th seed just to get Zion some rest. And it's like, well, the guy doesn't need that much rest. Like, I don't understand this whole, like Alvin Gentry and this coaching staff. And I understand, like, there are some implications that we probably don't know about, but it's like, get him out there. And then finally, over these last couple of games, they got him out there. He got 22 the game before. He got 25 last night. And he put up 22 and 7 last night. The guy can be productive. You just got to give him the playing time. Now, does that mean they'll win? No. Again, they lost to Sacramento yesterday. But for me, the reality is you just have to get him out there. And finally, they're getting him out there. Now, they're going to wait till next season to get him up to 30, 35 minutes. That's pretty clear. That's unfortunate that we can't see it this year. But the reality is it's not about Zion and the issues with – or it's not about, like, him, his size, whatever, his weight. To me, it's the coaching staff giving him the minutes for him to contribute. But yeah, let's move on to the Phoenix Suns. They're 4-0. For me with Phoenix, as I mentioned earlier, it is this kind of like beginning of the season kind of thing with Phoenix where it's like, oh, they're kind of showing out just, and they're a young team, so they just want to go out and play. But as you said, Brandon, I think the biggest thing with them is that schedule in particular and how they're going to struggle down the road when they play some more competitive teams, correct?
Yeah.
Shane, what are your feelings on Phoenix overall? Your mic is still muted.
My bad there. No, I'm with you guys. I think it's just like, them playing really well right at the start, getting their feet wet, and then kind of slowing down once they get a taste of reality.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the Sixers as well, as we're mentioning Indiana, because Indiana, of course, TJ Warren's been balling. We know he's a shooter. We know he just has a pure shot. He finished with 53 over the weekend against the Sixers. Ben Simmons, day-to-day with an MRI. I think it's a torn or not a torn patella, but like a twisted patella or whatever. So left knee is basically what it is. He's day-to-day. Do you guys feel as I do with the Sixers about how if Ben Simmons doesn't play and Joel does, they're better? And if Joel doesn't play, Ben Simmons plays, they're better. They can't both be on the court at the same time. And in some way, a Ben Simmons injury for a few days is maybe in some cases a blessing in disguise, considering how bad the Sixers have looked so far. Brandon, I'll start with you on that.
I think the Sixers, there's something about the Sixers that I can't put my finger on, but like last year during the year, I remember people being like, oh, this team's so disorganized, they're not going to be able to make it. And then they made a run. They got through it all the way. I think it was like it was the
semis.
The semis. They played the Raptors in the semis. And like it was a good effort. But there's something about the 76ers I just can't put my finger on. Like they always seem to just, it always feels like there's just some sort of turmoil going on in their organization. You know?
Yeah, organizationally, I don't think it runs very smoothly there.
Brett Brown, honestly, like I don't know why they brought him back. Like I have a hard time even understanding that. Al Horford, he doesn't look happy. That's very clear. I mean, obviously, he's off the bench for them, which makes no sense at all. Al Horford can still contribute for any team, but him off the bench is kind of rough. I want to see how they play. Obviously, Orlando's probably not a good test for this, but maybe down the road in the playoffs. Probably not, because we don't want to see Ben Simmons or Joel get hurt, of course. But the reality is I just don't think they can play together anymore. I just don't see how it makes sense. I think that's what you're kind of putting your finger on there, Brandon, or wondering what it is. I think it's that simple. I think they just can't play together. And I think the last few games in the bubble, especially against Indiana, with Joel kind of being mad at Shake, Milton, and all this stuff, where it's like, this is just not working. And it's not going to work. I don't know. Maybe Brett Brown leaves and they can get a new coach that fits what they're trying to do. But right now, I don't even think they know what they're trying to do, and it's rough to watch.
I mean, somebody's going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to. I mean, just, it'll just be interesting to see who.
So a major debate that we've been having, specifically Brandon and I have been having over the last week, in talking about the Raptors and the Celtics. And, of course, Brandon, you are a Raptors fan. And we've been talking about, the East and where those two teams in particular line up. I personally feel like the Celtics are a better team. I think, at least from a starting lineup perspective, they're a much better roster. I think if you have guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, scoring about 20 a night and really contributing, especially at the statistical side, and, of course, Kemba still trying to kind of figure himself out. But I think once Kemba's fully healthy, especially, I do feel like they are better than Toronto. You don't feel that way. And, of course, I've been impressed with Toronto as well, especially against the Raptors, considering how they played defensively and how Van Vliet has been. But you don't feel that you don't feel the same way as I do with the Celtics and the Raptors. Say your piece on your thoughts with the Raptors.
I'll just say this. As I said, as I've given hints at throughout talking about basketball teams today, I'll say it over and over and over and over again. You can have the best starting lineup in the world, but if you don't have a good bench, when it comes down to bench versus bench, bye-bye. Like, I feel like the Raptors have the deepest team in the league. And that's not even a Homer's thing. Like, that's not even like me being a Raptors fan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I was a fan of any other team, I would say the exact same thing. You look at the Raptors team, they have the deepest bench in the league, hands down.
I would also piggyback off that in saying that compared to even the Clippers right now, compared to the Lakers right now, I mean, I think the Celtics is an exception on this, but like they don't have new guys. The team is virtually the same going into the bubble, and I think that's kind of been a big thing. But in terms of the Celtics and the Raptors debate, Shane, what are your thoughts on those two teams right now?
Well, in addition to a good bench, I mean, I think Toronto definitely has one of, if not the best defenses, which is huge. I mean, that's, I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I'm not the first person to say this. Offense sells tickets, defense wins games, and I think when you're looking at a team like Boston, they got some good scorers, Tatum, obviously. But I don't think it will be enough to overcome Toronto, given, and I mean, also, you look at, Toronto, they're not the best scoring team, but I think they have enough guys that are good enough to, kind of overcome that. So, yeah, I think Toronto wins this one pretty easily.
Well, the thing about Toronto is they spread it out, Like, they don't have a single player who scores all the points. They'll, do, 15, 15, 15, 20, 15, 10, 15, whatever. But I think it'll definitely be a good game.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a
tonight we have
high-scoring
Celtics Raptors.
I think it'll be a competitive game, and we'll see. But, yeah.
And then Shane as well. I think one of the biggest things for me with the Celtics is the fact that Kemba's kind of still trying to get his feet wet. Does Kemba sort of change the debate for you, especially once we get towards playoff time? Do you think his impact is as much as I think it is?
Well, I mean, yeah, Tatum is obviously the main man there. But I know what you mean in terms of Kemba kind of becoming like the number two guy. You know what I mean? I don't know if he is yet. I would argue he is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he he's a good he's a good 3-point shooter, which helps. And he's developing really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
which helps as he is a guard. So
Mm-hmm.
um
I think.
yeah, he's averaging like what,
Mhm.
20 points a game,
Yeah. Well, I mean.
which is pretty good.
Mhm.
And so yeah, no, I think I think he's definitely a big part of this team's
Yeah.
success without a doubt.
No, no, and excuse me, Shane, but I think the biggest thing with Kemba for me personally is the fact that yeah, he's still kind of trying to get minutes because with his knee or whatever and all that. But it is Brad Stevens' system of these point guards. He fits what they're trying to do offensively, especially with
Yeah.
Brad Stevens, and that for me kind of changes the game a little bit. Brandon, I know you probably won't feel the same way, but what are your thoughts on Kemba, especially when he gets to full speed?
Um, I think he'll add another. I mean, he'll be another weapon for the Celtics. Um, but I don't know. It's interesting. The Celtics. I feel like they're yet another team in the league that just is all about the scoring and not about the defense.
Mm-hmm. I think
Yeah.
defensively they're
They
pretty good
just
though.
try to put like it seems like they're kind of like a hammer where they just try and outscore their opponent
Mm-hmm.
and just don't focus as much on getting that lockdown, which is
I,
kind of where I feel like the Raptors are the most balanced because they
mm-hmm.
score and they also focus on
Yeah,
like
they're 10th in
really
scoring.
they suffocate teams on defense.
Mm-hmm. And that we saw that particularly against LA. I think they're
Yeah.
about middle of the pack to, a bit higher on defense for Boston. A main reason why we are focusing on this game tonight is Brandon and I have a friendly wager going on to this game. We've honestly talked about this game like it's a playoff game. It's not. It's just a regular seeding game. But here is our bet. So next week I will, if the Raptors win, I'll have to say that the
When
best
the Raptors win.
again. I will have to say the best team in the league next week. And if someone can do Photoshop for me, I'm kind of throwing this out there for any of you who are listening or will figure it out. I want to Photoshop Brandon's, body or whatever in his face and Photoshop it next to Taco Fall. So that's the bet. Is
What a dumb name. Taco Fall. Would
I
it be a
agree.
waterfall made of tacos?
I love Taco, man. So that is the bet. So Photoshop Brandon next to Taco Fall, or I have to say the Raptors are the best team in the league
Damn right.
next week. And that is our bet for that game tonight.
I'm just sitting here chilling.
That is a six
Shane's
o'clock
like, I
start.
don't care.
6 o'clock start on TNT. We're gonna go on to some college football news. Actually, we can kind of go college and NFL for this. Shane, I'll start with you. Thoughts about the amount of players opting out, obviously, particularly in college with all these top prospects in the NFL draft coming up next year, particularly guys like Gregory Rousseau, who have decided to opt out to prepare for the NFL draft. And obviously, I think it's like 60 NFL players who decided to opt out of the 2020 season.
Yeah. It's not, it's not surprising. And I honestly, I don't blame them. I certainly wouldn't feel safe coming in every day to the training facility with 100 other people who, I mean, it's different for like the NBA where guys are all in the bubble, so that none of them are sick. But football, it doesn't feel like they're doing anything. They're like, well, just make sure you're smart. But then, you're going to get guys like Zeke who are going to go party or whatever. And so then, I mean, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's a big risk. And it doesn't feel like the NFL is doing much to try and mitigate those risks. You know
And
what
do
I
you
mean?
feel the same way to a heightened degree with college as well?
Yeah. I mean, college is even worse because, the number of guys on a college team is like double that of an NFL team. So, and they're likely even bigger partiers because, college. Um, but, yeah, I mean, it should be a sign when most colleges aren't going back into class this fall. I mean, put two and two together here. Like it's, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. There was the Pac-12 news that came out about the player demands that they want. And I was reading through them, and it's not just, and it was interesting because it's not just stuff about COVID, which I was expecting it to be, but it's also stuff like racial injustice and, like medical coverage, endorsements or whatever. So, I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's not just a health thing, but it's just everything, better quality of play in general, if that makes sense. So, yeah, but we can talk more about that in a minute, obviously.
Brandon, like, what are your thoughts on all the opt-outs going on in college and the NFL? And then, of course, as well with the NFL, one of the things that we've discussed is these teams like the Saints making their own miniature bubble or things like that. But what are your thoughts on all the opt-outs over the last week?
I think all the players opting out have the right to opt out. For some reason, I feel like if the season goes down, it's going to be some crazy tight, like, security protocol, basically, to make sure players aren't doing something stupid, like going to a strip club or going to a casino, or, I don't know. The farther along we get in the process, the more I start going, wow, maybe we will get a season. Because, like, we've always said, oh, there won't be a season, but, like, y'all, we're getting close to training camp starting.
Well, camp has already started.
Yeah,
well, it's already started, but we're getting close to actual practice.
Yeah.
Like, players actually getting on the field and practicing.
We're a month away now, basically, from the start of the NFL season, and like 3 weeks away.
If we're not gonna have the season, it's gonna get stopped soon.
Yeah.
And it's not looking like the NFL has any plans to say, nah. So, I mean, I think we'll see.
I think college is going to have a tougher time.
Yeah.
And it is interesting, and we'll get to that with the Pac-12. But Shane, just to finish off the NFL portion of the discussion, is there a possibility for you that the first month they go a couple weeks and then they're like, we're done? Like, we can't do this? Because do you feel like there's a potential or there's a high probability that we go for the first couple weeks and it just doesn't look good and they have to shut down, or no?
I think it's definitely possible. Especially for a sport like football. I mean, if there's any sport where you're going to spread COVID, it would be that. Because, guys are in each other's faces, like sweating and spitting on each other and whatever, so it's if one guy on one team has it, I mean, he's probably going to pass it on to at least 10 other guys on the other team.
Once we actually have games and stuff, yeah.
Right. In a game scenario, that is. Yeah, and so I think there is definitely a chance that could happen. They would either, you know, stop and have have a look at ways that they can make it safer, or maybe even waiting until January,
as we've
uh,
talked about.
or even like November, December, or whatever, whenever a vaccine will be available, probably in that time frame sometime, according to Fauci and people like him. So, and I mean, honestly, I wouldn't mind that. We're going to be, we'll have plenty of basketball and hockey and stuff in the meantime. So it's like, you know, if and even baseball, hopefully. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I don't think it would be the worst thing. It would be nice if it just kind of kept on track, but um, it's I mean, it's obviously more important to try and not spread this virus. So
Mm-hmm. Yep.
yeah, so whatever happens. I mean, we've seen that leagues can be adaptable. Just look at basketball and hockey and even baseball to a lesser degree, but still. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I think it's a possibility, but I'm not too worried about it. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And you see teams, especially in college as well. I believe UConn has canceled their season. We don't have D2 or D3 happening this year. But let's get to the Pac-12. Shane listed most of those demands. Brandon, I'll start with you. What was your reaction to those demands by the Pac-12 players?
So the COVID one, the demands about better safety for COVID, that's fine, right? That's totally justifiable. A pandemic is not the time to be asking for more, for like basically a raise,
Mm-hmm.
and it's weird because it's like they get their here. I'm gonna pull it up just to it's like one of those things where players have talked about doing something like this, but it feels kind of, I don't know. To me, it feels kind of scummy because it feels like they're using a pandemic to get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Shane, what are your feelings on it?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I get the frustration and that players want this because they've been wanting this forever. So like I get it, but I mean we're struggling just to have a season.
Yeah.
So why are you worrying so much about that right now?
Yeah.
And again, I get it, but like time and place, I don't know.
and they say part of their thing is eliminating lavish salaries and facility expenditures to preserve all sports must be prioritized. I'm sorry, how many of you damn players on the who came for the NCAA who go to these teams in the Pac-12 went to those teams because of the facilities?
Well, let's talk about like USC, Alabama,
Wazoo, UW, Oregon, UCLA,
Oregon especially.
Like there was a cornerback from Oregon who was part of this group. I mean, to me, it's incredibly hypocritical because facilities are one of the major reasons
you went there in the first.
Exactly.
So there's a bigger problem here. And Brandon and I have talked about this over the last few days. In this idea that in this whole process, right? And I've mentioned the whole facilities thing and the paradox even for the colleges about the facilities. The idea that they are struggling in terms of, getting college football and wanting that revenue. They wouldn't be struggling if they were freaking out saying we can't afford players because we have a stupid swimming pool or a hot tub in our gosh dang facility. They don't need that. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that's maybe a separate issue. The reality of it is these conferences, the problem right now with college football, other than the paying, which is very important, I still feel like players need a stipend and all these things. The problem with college football right now is showing itself during the pandemic tenfold. The problem is the conferences are taking the initiative. The Pac-12, the Big 12, the Big 10, everybody, the conferences and those individual conference commissioners are taking the initiative to make this season possible. Now, obviously, there's ups and downs with that. But the NCAA president, Mark Emmerick, and everyone else in the NCAA is almost sitting back and just watching this happen. They're not controlling what's happening around college football just as a whole, and that's part of the problem. And I know, Brandon and I, you've talked about this as well, where it's like, okay, the conferences are just controlling it anyway. Eventually, the conferences are going to be like, we don't need the NCAA. We can pay these players. We can do medicals. We can do all this stuff without having the NCAA bubble, if you will, surrounding it. Because the bigger issue here is just the NCAA is not controlling it at all. It's just the conferences. So why do we need the NCAA in the first place? Brandon, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think this might be the end of conferences being attached to the NCAA. It doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't make much sense to me, because what does the NCAA even do other than give out punishments and be a buzzkill? Like,
I mean, the conferences are making all of these decisions.
That's the thing. Because you say that, and then I think about it. It's like, yeah, no, you're actually right. Because, I mean, I now that I, look back on it, you look at the stories, and everybody says, oh, this conference is only going to play this way, or this conference is doing that. And it's like, why do they have that kind of jurisdiction? You know what I mean? And not, like, why doesn't the NCAA step in and say, okay, well, here's how it's going to be? But no, they're just like sitting back in their easy chair saying, okay, sure, you do that. It's like, what? Huh.
And then Shane, going forward a little bit, the college football playoff is now going to be announced on the 20th of December, I believe. In the sense of how it's going to work with the conferences and, let's say, just, the SEC and the Pac-12, basically every conference playing basically interconference, most if not all of the time. How does that change your approach? Let's say if we get a vaccine and we're able to get the college football playoff, how does that change your approach in looking at these rankings? Or how do you think they're going to be able to rank these teams, correctly, if you will? Obviously, we've had our individual issues with the committees in the past. This may be exacerbated a little bit because I don't even know how the committee is going to approach this.
I think this year, because I've thought about this too. I think this year, more than ever, you're going to see like the best teams from the Power 5 conferences making it up there. There's not going to be this whole debate of like, oh, should this person or this team or that team or whatever. It's just going to be like, okay, first place in SEC is, let's say, Alabama. They're number one. And then first place in the Big 12 or the Big 10, let's say it's Ohio State. Okay, they're number two. I feel like it's just going to be very cut and dry, because all you have to go out, because a big part of the decision that they make in the committee is the 3 non-conference games, which doesn't seem like it would be that big of a deal, but it actually is. I don't know why, because those games mean nothing, but or they shouldn't mean anything. But yeah, so when you don't have that, I mean, you just have to look at whoever's the best in their conference and just say, okay, well, I guess this team is the best overall or whatever. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it'll just be a much more simplified ranking. I imagine it'll just be the 4, highest, or the 4 teams with the highest win percentages from each conference minus a 5th one, whichever that 5th conference will be.
Mm-hmm.
So probably the Big 12 or the Pac-12, but yeah.
And that's
Hey, I gotta head out.
all right. Sounds good.
Good luck with the rest of the show.
All right.
I'll talk to you guys later.
A great rest of your day, Brandon.
Yep.
Shane and I will finish off
Yeah.
the show for today. All right, so let's move on also to the NFL and their use of virtual fans. They are debating using virtual fans, as we've seen with the NBA. Thoughts on that and how that would be operating? Because I don't even know how that's going to work.
I mean, hey, I'm all for it, but yeah, that's the thing. How would that work? Because, it's not like the NBA where it's a small court. You can just put people up on a wall and then you have their screens right there. You got to, like, what are you going to do? Put an individual screen in each seat? I mean, that just sounds like kind of a hassle. But I mean, honestly, like, they could. I'm not saying they should, but they could probably have fans if they wanted to, like, just
limited amounts.
Yeah, like quarter capacity. You leave, like, if you got a family of 4 or something, have them sitting there and then leave, 3 seats between them and the next group, right? And then just have seating be, every other row. So that way there's space between people. I mean, it's like flying on a plane, which is kind of a strange analogy, but it's true. That's what they've been doing with planes. So, and, just have everyone wear a mask, all that. I mean, it could probably work, but I get that it's kind of risky. So,
because you don't know how an individual fan's going to act or whatever.
Right.
I would recommend to look at the MLS for this in particular. This is something to watch out for because I know with Nashville and FC Dallas, who had positive cases and couldn't be in the MLS's back tournament, I think for both of those cities, they are debating on having limited capacity. I am interested if the MLS does do this throughout the country and how that works. So I would watch for that first. And then if that is successful, I think more leagues, especially the MLB and the NFL, are going to look at these as potential options.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. I mean, that would be the safest way to do it, probably. But,
and then, And then for the Bills, Tre'Davious White, their best corner, he opted in, but he was considering opting out. Of course, family issues with the pandemic, with his grandfather who passed away. But it is interesting, the fan reaction to this. Obviously, for us in the media, we understand the reasoning, and most fans should understand the reasoning as to why players are considering opting out or obviously opting out. With the fair percentages we talked about opting out of the NFL, but fans were giving him a hard time, saying that he's selfish or whatever. What do you think about fans being this way and sort of thinking like football over everything kind of mentality when it comes to something like a pandemic? Why do you think fans are acting this way?
It's ridiculous. I mean, honestly, I couldn't tell you why they're acting like this. I mean, people are, some people are just selfish and they don't they look at, I think it was, who said this? I don't remember, but something said something that was really kind of profound. It was like, do you really consider us people when we take off our uniform after Sunday?
Right.
And I really thought about that, and I was like, wow, yeah. I mean, I do, obviously, but like, there are so many people who just see them playing their game, and they're like, oh yeah, win for my team or whatever. But then after that, they don't really care about them,
Mm-hmm.
which I've never really understood that, because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
football is just their job, and they are humans outside of
Mm-hmm.
that organization. So I mean, if Russell Wilson opted out of the season, I mean,
It would
yeah,
be sad for the whole league, but at the end of the day, you would understand
I'd
it.
be a bit upset, obviously, but like, I'd be like, dude, I get it. Like, it's, I mean, honestly, if I were in the NFL, I would maybe opt out as well. I mean,
No, I think I would, yeah.
yeah. So,
Compared
you
to
know,
the NBA or whatever, where I think I probably would have a solid understanding on what their protocols are.
NBA would be fine. I think.
But if you're in the NFL, like I mean, yeah, obviously there is something of like, oh, this is going to affect players' careers. I mean, of the 60 players that opted out, some of them are in backup roles. So
Yeah.
I mean, again, football's cut and dry, especially if you're trying to make a roster year after year. So yeah, it could
Yeah.
affect your career, and I think that's the most difficult part of this decision. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that this is bigger than football, and
Oh
the
yeah.
reality is that they opt out. It may affect their careers, it may not. We may be wrong about that. We don't even know. So let's not rush to make judgments on that and recognize, like, oh yeah, like no, we get it, and especially for these players that have medical conditions. But even if not, like it's too much of a risk. And then what happens if the season stops after 2 weeks?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I really hope it doesn't affect their careers. I hope that, owners and general managers will take the high road and realize the circumstance, and,
Right?
say like, okay, we'll give you a pass on this one because, for obvious reasons. But will that happen? I
Probably
don't know.
not. Probably not.
Yeah,
And that's the most
which is the
frustrating part
sucky
about it.
thing.
Right. That's the most frustrating part about it. Um,
Yeah,
but I think you're right. I think in looking at social media or interviews or those kind of things, like it has helped the players, or it has helped people understand in more recent years
hmm
that these players are actually people and have lives and have stories. We talk about Josh Jacobs' story a lot, or I do on this show. Someone who is homeless most of his life and then finds a way to make it to the NFL. I mean, there's so many countless stories about that. But just these
Jimmy
guys making
Graham's like that.
right.
Yeah,
So there's so many of these guys with incredible stories throughout all these leagues, especially, and that's important to understand because as you understand those stories, you also understand their lives and them as people as well.
yeah. It's funny too, because I mean, I remember when we were, when we were younger, it's like before social media was a big thing. It's like you only saw glimpses of a player's personal life if they were like spotted by paparazzi, or if they were doing some interview or something like on the news or whatever. But it wasn't until like social media where, people are like, Russell just posts Instagram stories of like his kids just
Mhm.
hanging out in the house, and it's like, that would have never been a thing 10 years ago. You know what I
Right.
mean? But yeah, it's just that kind
Yeah.
of stuff happens with our new age of technology, of course. So
hmm And then let's talk about the XFL. I know Brandon and I have been pretty big on the XFL. Dwayne The Rock Johnson is now basically one of the new owners of the XFL. They finally got new ownership there. But I'm really interested in their approach with this. And I'm starting to like this approach here because Dwayne, especially in his comments after the purchase, obviously the purchase has been officially completed by this morning. It got officially completed. But they're taking a much more minor league attitude to it than someone like Vince McMahon, where they're like, we want to give these players a shot to get to the NFL. And very clearly with the AAF 2 years ago, which unfortunately folded due to funding, and the XFL last year, guys like PJ Walker getting a job with the Panthers. I mean, these guys, if you play well, you can revitalize your career and get on a 53-man roster and be competitive for a spot. I mean, so many of the guys from the AAF actually got playing time last year. So in the way that Dwayne is treating it, and, you know, that ownership group now that he's partnering with, they are really wanting to just give these players a shot compared to so many of these other leagues or these other iterations of these leagues, the AAF and the XFL, where that wasn't really the case necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, the interesting thing about the XFL is I think if, you know, if the season wasn't cut short, because I mean, they only played like half the season.
Yeah.
That's what really hurt them. I think that's pretty clear. And, you know, I think if they had played a full season, they probably wouldn't have, you know, gone and filed for bankruptcy. And so I think this is exactly what it needed, is just somebody who not only believes in it and wants to really make something of it, but somebody that people really like, because I mean, everybody loves Dwayne Johnson. Like, I mean, I've never talked to a single person who didn't like him, you know, and he's so charismatic, and he's a big figure in many forms of entertainment. And so, you know, now people are already saying, oh, The Rock bought the XFL. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. This is great. You know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, you know, getting people on board in that way is big.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, you know, considering that he bought it and now it feels like it has kind of this forward momentum, I think it will continue and something will be made of it going forward.
Yeah. I think it's just going to gain a lot more respect.
Yeah.
Not only with the Dwayne being there, but also that thing that I mentioned earlier about the idea that this is going to be focused on a minor league system to give these players a shot to get to the league, which is ultimately the point of these at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then
at least from a player's perspective.
Right.
But yeah.
Our last topic for the day. Now, I was kind of thinking about ways to make this conversation interesting, because obviously with golf, maybe not a lot of people are necessarily too interested of it. The PGA Championship is this weekend. What a weird year for golf just as a whole, in the sense that the most major event of 2020 was a match play with Brady and Manning and, you know, Mickelson and Tiger. And then now we're finally in the first major of the year, and what's I believe supposed to be the second major of the year. Of course, the Masters is in November this year with the PGA. And in thinking about the best way for us to approach this discussion, to focus on a wider range, I keep thinking, of course, about Tiger Woods. And in coming into the PGA this weekend, that was kind of the marquee, right? Tiger, after winning the Masters in 2019, can finally continue his run of getting majors. But in some way, it's created an expense of these other golfers that have played tremendously well. I mean, Thursday in the PGA, these guys were just raking the ball. Guys like Bryson DeChambeau breaks his club because he's leaning on it too much, right? And that was kind of the big highlight from yesterday. But I guess the point of how I'm trying to take this conversation is golf as a whole has been better in recent years, right? Since Tiger came in, the quality of play is a lot better. The quality of groupings, especially in this PGA, especially on Thursday, were much better with guys like Ricky Fowler and Bryson DeChambeau, Phil Mickelson, whatever. So the groupings are better. The play is 1,000% better. Yet, when Tiger wasn't there or isn't competitive, it just isn't interesting to a wide range of an audience. And I wonder why golf especially the personality for some reason is just not there. I just don't really understand that, considering the amount of talent that is in golf, that Tiger at this late stage of his career, which obviously with all the stuff that he went through, whatever, it is weird that he's just the marquee at every tournament, even though the talent's been a lot better. But what are your feelings on that?
I think, as you said, Tiger winning that PGA in 2019.
The Masters.
That was, sorry. I have a way with words. I think that win, that was like that truly was a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
It was, you could make a movie about this man's life, truly. Like, him being this hotshot golfer, and then all the stuff happening in the whole decade, and then his, kind of his comeback. And, I think that tournament is what, to me, felt like, kind of put golf back on the map in a way, because people were talking about that so much. They were like, "Oh, Tiger won," and everyone was like, "What? He did? I thought he was irrelevant now," or whatever. And then, people kind of started talking about it again, and yada. And so then, and now you kind of, like you said, it's like when he's around, it's like you can tell it's just, there's more attraction to it, because I think people are just so fascinated by this guy because of his story. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody, he is an athlete that everybody knows about, like the personal life and stuff. I mean, for obvious reasons, but I don't know. It's an interesting sport. I wonder how they will continue to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you can't rely on Tiger forever. You know what I mean?
And that's kind of where I wanted to push this conversation, because
Yeah.
here's the reality. The reality of the matter is, when Tiger was not playing at a high level, no one really was talking about golf, even when the majors were on.
Mm-hmm.
And now Tiger's back.
The only guy that came close was like Phil Mickelson.
Well, Jordan Spieth as well. I would say true. Jordan Spieth, a few years ago. But it's like, well, yeah, how does golf move forward when you have so much good talent around golf now? The talent around golf is better. And obviously, it has been interesting with no fans, especially for Tiger as well. But at the end of the day, like, what is the future of golf going to look like? When is the next personality going to come in and captivate people like Tiger? And I just don't know how that's going to look, even with the talent being as good as it is. And that's where I have such a difficult time in looking at something like the PGA, where he was the marquee. He was like the number one thing on ESPN the last few days.
Yeah. I mean, that's the tough thing about golf, is you need that guy,
Mm-hmm.
Because golf as a sport, I mean, it's not, let's be honest, it's not the most interesting sport to watch and follow.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to, like football, basketball, whatever.
From a national scale. Yeah.
Right. It's a great time, you're going out with your family or your friends or whatever, go and, do 18 holes.
But watching it on TV without Tiger, it's not.
That's great. But watching it on TV, it's like,
the majors only kind of lean to a niche audience without Tiger there at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the majors are always, a big point of discussion anyways, but yeah, especially when he's not around. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know where you, I don't know what you do, like as a, for the PGA, how you how you continue to gain people's interests.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
you
kind
know,
of what I'm trying
without
to
having to
figure out.
rely on him.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And
Yeah,
especially now with this being the first major of the year and in such a strange year for golf as a whole, you look at that match play, and Tiger was involved in that. You look at just how everything in some way, even when Tiger wasn't even that good, there
yeah.
was intrigue for the first couple days before he inevitably missed the cut or barely made the cut, which was about the most interesting thing you had on a random golf weekend for some reason. But
Right.
it's like I don't know, and I think the main conclusion that we're going is we just don't know,
Hmm.
and it's tough. I don't know how golf is going to grow more than a niche sport if there isn't another personality like Tiger. Obviously not as crazy as Tiger's life story, but someone with a unique personality. I just don't know if I don't see how that's going to ever happen in golf after Tiger, at least for a few years, considering when Tiger wasn't there, it was just a rough sledding for a few years, minus guys like Mickelson or Spieth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. And that is it for today. Thank you, Shane. And of course, thank you, Brandon, who had to leave a little bit earlier today. That is it for today. We will see you all back next week for more basketball, more craziness as we're getting closer to the NBA playoffs. See you all next week.
Yeah. See ya.